15. My dear heroic king, due to my past sincere service to the Lord, I could remember everything of my past life, even while in the body of a deer. Well, that's exceptional. Because I am aware of the fall down in my past life, I always keep myself separate from the association of ordinary men. Being afraid of their bad materialistic association, I wander alone, unnoticed by others. Purport of Srila Prabhupada. In Bhagavad Gita, it is said, Swalpam api asidharmasya. Bhagavad Gita 240. It is certainly a great fall to go from human life to animal life. But in the case of Bharata Maharaja, or any devotee, devotional service to the Lord never goes in vain. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 8.6, Yam yam vapi smaran bhavan tyajat ante kale varam. At the time of death, by nature's law, the mind is absorbed in a certain type of thinking. This may lead one to animal life, yet, for a devotee, there is no loss. Even though Bharata Maharaja received the body of a deer, he didn't forget his position. Consequently, in the body of a deer, he was very careful to remember the cause of his downfall. As a result, he was given a chance to be born in a family of very pure Brahmanas. Thus, his service to the Lord never went in vain. Well, that's good news to know. Even though he's taking birth as an animal. Text 16. Simply by associating with exalted devotees, anyone can attain perfection of knowledge, and with the sword of knowledge can cut to pieces the illusory associations within this material world. Through the association of devotees, one can engage in the service of the Lord by hearing and chanting Shravanam Kirtanam. Thus, one can revive his dormant Krishna consciousness and sticking to the cultivation of Krishna consciousness. Return home, back to Godhead, even in this life. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. To become liberated from material bondage, one must give up the association of worldly people and accept the association of devotees. Positive and negative processes are mentioned in this regard. Through the association of devotees, one develops Krishna consciousness, which is dormant within. This Krishna consciousness movement is giving this chance to everyone. We are giving shelter to everyone who is serious about progressing in Krishna consciousness. We arrange for their lodging and board so that they can peacefully cultivate Krishna consciousness and return home back to Godhead, even in this life. Thus end The Bhaktivedanta purports of the fifth canto, 12th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled The Conversation Between Maharaj Rahugana and Jada Bharata. Haribol. Chapter 13. Further talks between King Rahugana and Jada Bharata. The Brahmana Jada Bharata became very kind to King Rahugana, and to disassociate him from the material world, he spoke figuratively of the forest of the material world. He explained that this material world is like a great forest in which one becomes entangled due to association with material life. In this forest, there are plunderers, the six senses, as well as carnivorous animals like jackals, wolves, and lions, wife, children, and other relatives. Whoa, that's really an amazing statement. In other words, he says, in this forest, there are plunderers, the six senses: eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin, and the mind, who are always and anxious to suck the blood from the head of the family. The forest plunderers and the carnivorous blood-sucking animals combine to exploit the energy of a man within this material world. In this forest, there is also a black hole covered by grass into which one may fall. Coming into the forest and being captivated by so many material attractions, one identifies himself with the material world, society, friendship, and love and family. Having lost the path and not knowing where to go, being harassed by animals and birds, one is also victimized by many desires. Thus, one works very hard within the forest and wanders here and there. He becomes captivated by temporary happiness and becomes aggrieved by so called distress. Actually, one simply suffers in the forest of so called happiness and distress. Sometimes he's attacked by a snake, meaning deep sleep. And due to the snake bite, he loses consciousness and becomes puzzled and bewildered about discharging his duties. Sometimes he is attracted by a woman other than his wife, and thus be thinks.
I think he.
No, and thus be thinks he enjoys extramarital love with another woman. He is attacked by various diseases, by lamentation, and by summer and winter. Thus, one within the forest of the material world suffers the pains of material existence, expecting to become happy. The living entity changes his position from one place to another. But actually, a materialistic person within the material world is never happy. Being constantly engaged in materialistic activities, he is always disturbed. He forgets that one day he has to die, although he suffers severely, being illusioned the material energy. Although he suffers severely being illusioned by the material energy, he still hankers after material happiness. In this way, he completely forgets his relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Wow. Exactly. Exactly what happens. But
In hearing this from Jad Bharata, Maharaj Rahugana revived his Krishna consciousness and thus benefited from Jadabharata's association. Oh, that's great. He could understand that his illusion was over, and he begged pardon from Jadabharata for his misbehavior. All this was told to Maharaj Parikshit by Sukadev Goswami. All right. Okay, Canto 5, chapter 13, and verse number, or text number 1. Jadabharata, who had fully realized, one second, who had fully realized Brahman. Okay, when it says fully realized Brahman, you realize that he is the servant of God. Continued, my dear king, Rakugana, the living entity wanders on the path of the material world, which is very difficult for him to traverse. And he accepts repeated birth and death. Being captivated by the material world under the influence of the three modes of material nature, sattva guna, rajo guna, and tamo guna, the living entity can see only the three fruits of activities under the spell of material nature. These fruits are auspicious, inauspicious, and mixed. He thus becomes attached to religion, economic development, and sense gratification, and the monistic theory of liberation, merging with the Supreme. He works very hard, day and night, exactly like a merchant who enters a forest to acquire some articles to sell later for profit. However, he cannot really achieve happiness within this material world. Wow, that's that everybody. Purport. One can very easily understand how difficult and insurmountable the path of sense gratification is. Not knowing what the path of sense gratification is, one becomes implicated in the repetition of birth and accepts different types of bodies again and again. Thus, one suffers in material existence. In this life, one may think that he is very happy being an American, Indian, Englishman, or German. But in the next life, one has to accept another body among 8,400,000 species. The next body has to be immediately accepted according to karma. One will be forced to accept a certain type of body, and protesting will not help. Oh boy, terrible. That is the stringent law of nature. Due to the living entity's ignorance and his eternal blissful life, he becomes attracted to material activities under the spell of Maya. In this world, he can never experience happiness, yet he works very hard to do so. This is called Maya. Text 2. O King Rahugana, in this forest of material existence, there are six very powerful plunderers. When the conditioned soul enters the forest to acquire some material gain, the six plunderers misguide him. Thus, the conditioned merchant does not know how to spend his money, and it is taken away by these plunderers. Like tigers, jackals, and other ferocious animals in a forest that are ready to take away a lamb from the custody of its protector. The wife and children enter the heart of the merchant and plunder him in so many ways. Oh yeah, it's so hard to make money, but the wife and children take away that money right away. Purport: in the forest, there are many plunderers, dacoits, jackals, and tigers. The jackals are compared to one's wife and children. In the dead of night, jackals cry very loudly. And similarly, one's wife and children in this material world also cry like jackals. The children say, Father, this is wanted. Give me this. I am your dear son. Or the wife says, I am your dear wife. Please give me this. This is now needed. In this way, one is plundered by the thieves in the forest. Not knowing the aim of human life, one is constantly being misguided. The aim of life is Vishnu, not Devitu Swata Gatim, Vishnu. Everyone works very hard to earn money, but no one knows that his real self interest is in serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Instead of spending money for advancing in the Krishna consciousness movement, okay, let's see. Instead of spending money for advancing the Krishna consciousness movement, one spends his hard earned money on clubs, brothels, liquor, slaughterhouses, and so forth. Due to sinful activities, one becomes implicated in the process of transmigration and thus has to accept one body after another. Being thus absorbed in a distressed condition, one never attains happiness. Oh, wait, that's horrible. Text number 3. In this forest, there are dense bowers composed of thickets of bushes, grass, and creepers. Yeah, you can get stuck in those uh, dense thickness of bushes and so forth. In these bowers, the conditioned soul is always disturbed by cruelly biting mosquitoes, envious people. He's equating envious people to mosquitoes that bite you. Sometimes he sees an imaginary palace in the forest, and sometimes he is bewildered by seeing a fleeting friend or ghost, which appears like a meteor in the sky. Wow. Purport: the material household is actually a whole of fruitive activity. To earn a livelihood, one engages in different industries and trades, and sometimes one performs great sacrifices to go to higher planetary systems. Apart from this, apart from this, at least everyone is engaged in earning a livelihood in some profession or occupation. In these dwellings, one has to meet many undesirable people, and their behavior is compared to the biting of mosquitoes. Ooh. This creates very undesirable conditions. Even in the midst of these disturbances, one imagines that he is going to construct a grand house and live there permanently, although he knows that he cannot. Gold is compared to a quickly fleeting friend, which appears like a meteor in the sky. It displays itself for a moment and is then gone. Consequently, karmis are attracted to gold or money, but these are compared herein to ghosts and witches. Ooh. My dear king, the merchant on the forest path of the material world, his intelligence victimized by home, wealth, relatives, and so forth, runs from one place to another in search of success. Sometimes his eyes are covered by the dust of a whirlwind. That is to say, in his lust, he is captivated by the beauty of his wife, especially during her menstrual period. Thus, his eyes are blinded and he cannot see where to go or what he is doing. Purport by Srila Prabhupada, it is said that household attraction resides in the wife because sex is the center of household life. Yan Maitunadi Vihamedi Sukam, he to chum. A materialistic person making his wife the center of attraction works very hard day and night. His only enjoyment in the material life is sexual intercourse. Therefore, karmis are attracted to women as friends or wives. Indeed, they cannot work without sex. Under the circumstances, the wife is compared to a whirlwind, especially during her menstrual period. Oh my God. Those who strictly follow the rules and regulations of household life engage in sex only once a month. At the end of the menstrual period, as one looks forward to this opportunity, his eyes are overwhelmed by the beauty of his wife. Thus, it is said that the whirlwind covers eyes with dust. Such a lusty person does not know that all his material activities are being observed by different demigods, especially the sun god, and are being recorded for the karma of one's next body. Astrological calculations are called Jyoti Shastra because the Jyoti, or effulgence, in the material world comes from the different stars and planets. The science is called Jyoti Shastra, the science of the luminaries. By the calculation of Jyoti, our future is indicated in other are indicated. In other words, all the luminaries, the stars, sun, and moon, witness the activities of the conditioned soul. Thus, he is awarded a particular type of body. A lusty person whose eyes are covered by the dust of the whirlwind of material existence does not at all consider that his activities are being observed by different stars, planets, and are being recorded. Not knowing this, the conditioned soul commits all kinds of sinful activities for the satisfaction of his lusty desires. Text 5. Wandering in the forest of the material world, the conditioned soul sometimes hears an invisible cricket making harsh sounds, and his ears become very much aggrieved. Sometimes his heart is pained by sounds of owls, which are just like the harsh words of his enemies. That's right. Sometimes he takes shelter of a tree that has no fruits or flowers. He approaches such a tree due to the strong appetite, and thus he suffers. He would like to acquire water, but he is simply illusioned by a mirage, and he runs after it. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. And Srimad Bhagavatam has said that the Bhagavata philosophy is meant for people who are completely free from envy. Paramo nirmatsaranam. The material world is full of envious people. Even within one's inner circle, there is much backbiting.
Mhm.
And this is compared to the sound vibration of a cricket in the forest. One cannot see the cricket, but one hears its sounds and thus becomes aggrieved. When one takes to Krishna consciousness, one always hears unpalatable words from relatives. That's for sure.
Mhm.
This is the nature of the world. One cannot avoid mental distress due to the backbiting of envious people. Being very much aggrieved, sometimes one goes to a sinful person for help. But he has no means to help because he has no intelligence. Thus, the living entity is disappointed. This is like running after a mirage in the desert in an effort to find water. Such activities do not produce any tangible results. Due to being directed by the illusory energy, a conditioned soul suffers in so many ways. Text number 6. Sometimes the conditioned soul jumps into a shallow river, or being short of food grains, he goes to beg food from people who are not at all charitable. Sometimes he suffers from the burning heat of household life, which is like a forest fire, and sometimes he becomes sad to have his wealth, which is as dear as life, plundered by kings in the name of Heavy income taxes. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. When one is hot due to the scorching sun, one sometimes jumps into a river to gain relief. However, if the river is almost dried up and the water is too shallow, one may break his bones by jumping in. That's happened to a lot of people. In the conditioned soul, the conditioned soul is always experiencing miserable conditions. Sometimes his efforts to get help from friends are exactly like jumping into a dry river. By such actions, he does not derive any benefit. He only breaks his bones. Wow. Sometimes, suffering from a shortage of food, one may go to a person who is neither able to give charity nor willing to do so. Sometimes one is stationed in household life, which is compared to a forest fire. Samsara dava nava lidha loka. When a man is heavily taxed by the government, he becomes very sad. Heavy taxation obliges one to hide his income, but despite his endeavor, the government agents are often so vigilant and strong that they take all the money away, and the conditioned soul becomes very aggrieved. Well, that was my position for a long time. I got, I got uh, 3 times consecutively
Audited.
audited, and each time it was miserable. It was horrible.
Hmm.
Thus, people are trying to become happy within the material world. But this is like trying to be happy in a forest fire. No one need go to a forest to set it ablaze. Fire takes place automatically. Similarly, no one wants to be unhappy in family life or worldly life, but by the laws of nature, unhappiness and distress are forced upon everyone. To become dependent
Dependent.
on another's maintenance is very degrading. Therefore, according to the Vedic system, everyone should live independently. Only the Sudras are unable to live independently. They are obliged to serve someone for maintenance. It is said in the Shastras, Kalo Sudra Sambhava. In this age of Kali, everyone is dependent on another's mercy for the maintenance of the body. Therefore, everyone is classified as a Sudra. In the 12th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, it is said that in Kali Yuga, the government will levy taxes without reciprocally benefiting the citizens. Anaristya vinakshayanti durviksha kara pidita. In this age, there will also be a shortage of rain. Therefore, scarcity of food will arise, and citizens will be very much harassed by government taxation. In this way, citizens will abandon their attempts to lead a peaceful life and will leave their homes and hearts and go to the forest in sheer disappointment. Well, there are a lot of people nowadays that are homeless, living in the streets. of big metropolises because, for one reason or another, they lost their house and they lost their job, and now they're living in the streets. And it's increasing. In the richest country in the world, there are a lot of people who are homeless now, unfortunately. Sometimes being defeated or plundered by a superior, powerful agent. A living entity loses all its possessions. That's that's called the tax collectors.
Hmm.
He then becomes very morose and lamenting their laws. He sometimes becomes unconscious. Sometimes he imagines a great palatial city in which he desires to live happily with his family members and riches. He thinks himself fully satisfied if this is possible, but such so called happiness continues only for a moment.
Hmm.
In other words, everything's like an illusion in the material world for karmis, materialistic people who are always involved in trying to make more money and spending it. The word Gandharva Puram is very significant in this verse. Sometimes in the forest a very big castle appeared, and this is called a castle in the air. In other words, it's illusory. Actually, this castle does not exist anywhere but in one's imagination. This is called Gandharva Pura. In the material forest, the conditioned soul sometimes contemplates great castles and skyscrapers, and he wastes his energy for such things, hoping to live in them very peacefully with his family forever. However, the laws of nature do not allow this. When he enters such a castle, when he enters such castles, he temporarily thinks that he is very happy, even though his happiness is impermanent. His happiness may last for a few years, but because of the owner of the castle has to leave the castle at the time of death, everything is eventually lost. This is the way of worldly transactions. Such happiness is described by Vidyapati as the happiness one derives upon seeing a drop of water in the desert. That's not going to help one's thirst. One needs to have a lot more water to satisfy their thirst in the desert. The desert is heated by scorching sunshine. And if we want to reduce the desert temperature, we need huge amounts of water, millions and millions of gallons. What effect will one drop have? Water certainly has value, but one drop of water cannot reduce the heat of the desert. In this material world, everyone is ambitious, but the heat is very scorching. What will an imaginary castle in the air do to help? Nothing. Srila Vidyapati has therefore sung Tat Tatala Saikate Vari Bindusama Sutta Mita Ramani Sma Ajay. The happiness of family life, friends, and society is compared to a drop of water in a scorching desert. The entire material world is busy trying to attain happiness because happiness is the prerogative of the living being. In other words, people want to be happy. Unfortunately, due to falling In contact with the material world, the living entity simply struggles for existence. Yeah, and that struggle for existence can be vicious in terms of the competition that goes on in the material world for money. Even if one becomes happy for a while, a very powerful enemy may plunder everything. That's happened a lot. There are many instances in which big businessmen suddenly become paupers in the street. Yet the nature of material existence is such that foolish people are attracted to these transactions and they forget the real business of self realization. Yeah, they're too much interested in increasing their 401k and other things like that rather than making spiritual advancement. Second, sometimes the merchants in the forest wants to climb the hills and mountains, but due to insufficient footwear, his feet are pricked by small stone fragments and by thorns on the mountain. Being pricked by them, he becomes very aggrieved. Sometimes a person who is very attached to his family becomes overwhelmed with hunger, and due to his miserable condition, he becomes furious with his family members. The ambitious the ambitious conditioned soul wants to be very happy in this material world with his family, but he is compared to a traveler in a forest who desires to climb a hill full of thorns and small stones. As stated in the previous verse, the happiness derived from society, friendship, and love is like a drop of water in the scorching heat of the desert. One may want to become very great and powerful in society, but this is like attempting to climb a hill full of thorns. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakura compares one's family to high mountains. Becoming happy in their association is like a hungry man endeavoring to climb a mountain full of thorns. Yeah, very difficult. Almost 99.9%, that means almost everybody, of the population is unhappy in family life, despite all the attempts being made to satisfy the family members. In the Western countries, due to the dissatisfaction of the family members, there is actually no family life. There are many cases of divorce, and out of dissatisfaction, the children leave the protection of their parents, especially in this age of Kali. Family life is being reduced. Everyone is becoming self-centered because that is the law of nature. Even if one has sufficient money to maintain a family, the situation is such that no one is happy in family life. Consequently, according to the Varnashrama institution, one has to retire from family life in middle age. Panchor Sordvam Vanam Rajet. One should voluntarily retire from family life at the age of 50 and go to Vrindavana or a forest. This is recommended by Srila Prahlada Maharaja, Bhagavatam 7.5.5. Tat satumanye surovarya dehinam. Sada samudvigna diyam asagrahat. Hitvat ma patam viham andakupam vanam gatoya darim asra yita. There is no benefit in transferring from one forest to another. One must go to the Vrindavana forest and take shelter of Govinda. That will make one happy. The International Society for Krishna Consciousness is therefore constructing a Krishna Balarama temple to invite its members, as well as outsiders, to come and live peacefully in a spiritual atmosphere. That will help one become elevated to the transcendental world and return home back to Godhead. Another sentence in this verse is very significant. Kotumbika krud yate vai janaya. When one's mind is disturbed in so many ways, he satisfies himself by becoming angry with his poor wife and children. The wife and children are naturally dependent on the father, but the father, being unable to maintain the family properly, becomes mentally distressed and therefore chastises the family members unnecessarily. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 12.2.9, Achinna Dara Dravina Yashanti Giri Kananam. Being disgusted with the family life, one separates from the family by divorce or some other means. If one has to separate, why should separate willingly? Why not separate willingly? Systematic separation is better than forced separation. Forced separation cannot make anyone happy, but by mutual consent or by the Vedic arrangement, one must separate from his family affairs at a certain age and fully depend on Krishna. This makes one's life successful. Text 9. The conditioned soul in the material forest is sometimes swallowed by a python or crushed. At such time, he is left lying in the forest like a dead person, devoid of consciousness and knowledge. Sometimes other poisonous snakes bite him. Being blind to his consciousness, he falls down into a dark well of hellish life with no hope of being rescued. Purport. When one becomes unconscious due to being bitten by a snake, one cannot understand what is taking place outside the body. The unconscious condition is the condition of deep sleep. Similarly, the conditioned soul is actually sleeping on the lap of the illusory energy. Wow. Bhaktivinoda Thakur has sung, Kota Nitra Yavo Maya Pisachira Kole. O living entity, how long will you sleep in this condition on the lap of the illusory energy? People do not understand that they are actually sleeping in this material world, being devoid of knowledge of spiritual life. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore says, Enechi o sadi maya nasibara laji. Parinama Mahamantra Lao Tumimaji. I have brought medicine to awaken every living being from perpetual sleep. Please receive the holy name of the Lord, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, and awaken. The Katha Upanishad 1.3.14 also says, Uttista Jagrata Prapya Varan Nibodhata. O living entity, you are sleeping in this material world. Please get up and take advantage of your human form of life. The sleeping condition means loss of all knowledge. In Bhagavad Gita 2.69, it is also said, Ya Nisa Sarvabhutanam Tasyam Jagati Samyami. What is night for all beings is the time of awakening for the self-controlled. Even in the higher planets, everyone is under the spell of the illusory energy. No one is really interested in the real values of life. The sleeping condition called Kala Sarva, the time factor, keeps the conditioned soul in a state of ignorance, and therefore pure consciousness is lost. In the forest, there are many blind wells, and if one falls down in one, there's no chance of being rescued. In a state of sleep, one remains perpetually bitten by some animals, especially snakes. Oh, text 10. Sometimes, in order to have a little insignificant sex enjoyment, one searches after debauched women, meaning prostitutes. In this attempt, one is insulted and chastised by the woman's kinsmen. This is like going to take honey from a beehive and being attacked by the bees. Sometimes, after spending lots of money, one may acquire another woman for some extra sense enjoyment. Unfortunately, the object of sense enjoyment, the woman, is taken away or kidnapped by another debauchee. It's going on all the time. Purport. In the great forests, honeycombs are very important. People often go there to collect honey from the combs, and sometimes the bees attack and punish them. Well, the more, let's say, experienced bee hunters or bee men, they'll always smoke the bees. They have uh, a match, and they produce smoke, and that sort of tranquilizes the bees, so they don't bite the bee man. But you have to have experience to do that. They have a certain type of uh, implement that produces smoke, and it sort of pacifies the bees so they don't bite him. In human society, those who are not Krishna conscious remain in the forest of material life simply for the honey of sex life. Such debauchees are not at all satisfied with one wife. They want many women, day after day. With great difficulty, they try to secure such women, and sometimes while trying to taste this kind of honey, one is attacked by a woman's kinsman and chastised very heavily. By bribing others, one may secure another woman for enjoyment. Yet, another debauchee may kidnap her or offer her something better. This woman hunting is going on in the forest of material world, sometimes legally and sometimes illegally. Consequently, in this Krishna consciousness movement, the devotees are forbidden to have illicit sex. Thus, they avoid so many difficulties. One should remain satisfied with one woman. Being duly married, one can satisfy one's lusty desires with his wife without creating disturbances in society and being punished for doing so. Just imagine, uh, the people who have harems, where they have maybe 10 wives. It's like hell. Uh, and then the wives, they're all competing with each other to have time with their uh, the same husband. So it's like a rat race. It's better not to have any wife than to have many wives. Many wives means many problems. No wife means no problems. One good wife means you'll be happy. But if you have many wives, there's always inner competition between the wives to have the what you would call attention of the husband. There was this one devotee. He had two wives, and he would sometimes come to the temple with the two wives. And then it happened that the two wives would come without that devotee. So what happened? It turned out that the two wives of the devotee became lesbians and kicked the devotee out from the house. It taught him a lesson. So, one should be satisfied with one wife and take good care of her and understand that eventually he has to also separate himself from that good wife and become completely dedicated to serving Krishna. Sometimes the living entity is busy counteracting the natural disturbances of freezing cold, scorching heat, strong wind, excessive rainfall, and so forth. When he is unable to do so, he becomes very unhappy. Sometimes he is cheated in business transactions, one after another. In this way, by cheating, living entities create enmity among themselves. In other words, people become jealous and get angry. This is an example of the struggle for existence, the attempt to counteract the onslaught of material nature. This creates enmity, meaning hatred, in society, and consequently, society is filled with envious people. One person is envious of another, and this is the way of the material world. The Krishna consciousness movement aims at creating an atmosphere of non envy. Of course, it is not possible for everyone to become Krishna conscious, but the Krishna consciousness movement can create an exemplary society wherein there is no envy. Well, there is envy, there's no doubt about it, in society. But when one is envious of someone else and one achieves the same position as the other person, their enviousness subsides. However, sometimes when one is envious of someone else and they uh, are by some way or other become equal to that person, their enviousness does not stop. And it continues until the envious person can destroy the other person. So that is uh, the situation oftentimes when one is not satisfied by being on the same level as the person he's envious of. He wants to destroy that person. Only that will give him satisfaction. It's very dangerous, people. Okay, text number 12, and then we'll stop. On the forest path of material existence, sometimes a person is without wealth, and due to this, does not have a proper home, bed, or sitting place, nor proper family enjoyment. He therefore goes to beg money from others, but when his desires are not fulfilled by begging, he wants to borrow or steal the property of others. Thus, he is insulted in society. Purport: the principles of beg, borrow, and steal are very appropriate in this material world. When one is in want, he begs, borrows, or steals. If begging is unsuccessful, he borrows. If he cannot pay, he steals. And when he is caught, he is insulted. This is the law of material existence. No one can live here very honestly. Therefore, by trickery, cheating, begging, borrowing, or stealing, one tries to satisfy his senses. Thus, no one in this material world is living peacefully. Okay, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, giving us the real nitty gritty of material life. Are there any questions or comments anyone has? Any questions or comments? So let's say a non-devotee person who reads these verses and who has never really been in contact with devotees previously would be shocked. They would say, I don't want to read this type of stuff, it's so negative.
Yeah, that's exactly how they will say.
Huh?
That's how they will probably, yeah. They'll think that, okay, this is all.
Misery.
Or some people might be like for the first time, if they've already experienced enough life, then I think they'll be like, wow, this is so true. So that's what I was thinking, Maharaj. Like, the Bhagavatam gives all the reality of the life, but through these analogies, like how it talks about a snake bite or beehive, everything. So that people can relate to the real world and then think like, oh, that is true. So
bittersweet. Material life is bittersweet.
yeah, even for example, how the analogy of family members.
Oh, family members can fight bitterly. Yeah, so hopefully, when someone becomes a devotee, they become mellow and do not become slaves of money and notoriety. They become mellowed out, and friendly, and satisfied with whatever Krishna has given them.
Mhm.
That should be our life. We should be satisfied by whatever Krishna has given naturally, and not try to artificially get more and more and more.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances, our glories to Srila Prabhupada. Such a wonderful class, Guru Maharaj. The whole human struggle
Conditions.
in the material world is is discussed today's class. So, Guru Maharaj, there are a couple of serious points here, but something I just want Your Grace to explain and elaborate a little bit more. One is like uh, one has to retire from family life in middle age. One should voluntarily retire from family life at the age of 50 and go to Vrindavan or such a forest. And then in the same purport, the last line is, if one has to separate, why not separate willingly? Systematic separation is better than forced separation. Forced separation cannot make anyone happy. So but by mutual consent or by Vedic arrangement, one must separate from his family affairs at a certain age fully depend on Krishna. This makes one's life successful. So, Gururaj, we go through this Ferris wheel. We take birth, we study, we educate so that we can feed ourselves, and then we do job, and then we get married, and we have byproducts, and then you know the byproducts they have their own family, and then we waste our whole life cycle, um, or we continue doing this. So I just wanted to specifically when they talk about when Shukdev Swami is speaking to Parikshit Maharaj, like one should voluntarily retire from, I mean, Prabhupada is saying one should voluntarily retire from family life at the age of 50 and go to Vrindavan and forest. So, can you comment anything on this?
How old are you?
I'm in this middle age.
Are you 50 years old?
Yes, Guru Maharaj.
Well, you better get ready to go to the forest. Going to the forest means you give up mundane life and you voluntarily welcome tapasya, living and very simply and not living extravagantly, purposely, so that you're not encumbered by always seeking more money, and more sense gratification. So at a certain point, we have to put the brakes on and stop being a sense gratifier and take up self abnegations. In other words, depriving ourselves of sense gratification so that we can have a peaceful life of contemplation, of devotional service, and service for Krishna. So that should happen as soon as we reach the period of middle age, or when we become, 50 years plus. We must begin the process of downsizing our life, downsizing our needs, downsizing our desires from material things, and upsizing spiritual things in our life. Most people don't get to that point, and they keep trying to increase their money, their uh, fame, and so forth. And because of that, they're always in anxiety. But someone who follows the Krishna consciousness process, in other words, as soon as you become 50 years old, you have to begin to downsize. In other words, by 20 years old, or 25 years old, you should get married. And after 25 years of marriage, you should downsize and eventually give up completely, your adult family life. In other words, your children have grown up, and downsize your expectations of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. Become more serious about serving Krishna, and eventually take the position of sannyas. And women also, uh, they uh, become completely renounced and give up sex enjoyment, all those things, and they just chant Hare Krishna and live a very simple life. So the men do it and the women do it. And in that way, they're able to think of God or Krishna at the moment of death and go back to Godhead. But if they continue, I have to take care of my wife and my young children. And as soon as those children get older, they get married, and they have children, then the person says, oh, but now I have to take care of the grandchildren. And when the grandchildren become adults, then he says, oh, but there's the third generation I have to take care of also. So he never ends up surrendering all his material desires, and he's always trying to maintain different generations of families. And he dies before having ever given up the desire for sense gratification. Yeah, there was one sadhu. He would visit this one man and trying to convince him to take sannyas. And the man always said, well, I'm not quite ready yet. I'll come back later in a couple of years. And every time he would come, he would say the same thing. I'm not ready yet. Come back again in a couple of years. So eventually, after 3, 4 times of waiting and coming and seeing that he was not ready yet, he came again. The sadhu came again, and he didn't see the householder. He said, where is he? And the people said, oh, he died. So he never really gave up home and hearth to take a life of tapasya and develop love for Krishna. Okay, thank you very much, my dear devotees. Our takeaway for today. Uh, it says, this is chapter text 12, Srimad Bhagavatam 5, Canto 5, chapter 13, and text number 12. The principles of beg, borrow, or steal are very appropriate in this material world. When one is in want, he begs, borrows, or steals. If begging is unsuccessful, he borrows. If he cannot pay, he steals. And when he is caught, he is insulted. This is the law of material existence. No one can live here very honestly, and therefore by trickery, cheating, begging, borrowing, or stealing, one tries to satisfy his senses. Thus, no one in this material world is living peacefully. And the verse, that is the purport, but the verse says, on the forest path of material existence, sometimes a person is without wealth, and due to this, does not have a proper home, bed, or sitting place, nor a proper family enjoyment. He therefore goes to beg money from others. or when his desires are not fulfilled by begging, he wants to borrow or steal the property of others. Thus, he is insulted in society. Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, there was there were some members of the family who were always trying to borrow money, and they would gamble and drink liquor, and they were just a real liability in the family. Yeah, that's because they couldn't control their senses. They became corrupted by the material nature. Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments? If not, then we will conclude this uh, seance and pick it up again tonight. Our takeaway for today is the following. The principles of beg, borrow, or steal are very appropriate in this material world. When one is in want, he begs, borrows, or steals. If begging is unsuccessful, he borrows. If he cannot pay, he steals. And when he is caught, he is insulted. This is the law of material existence. No one can live here very honestly. Therefore, by trickery, cheating, begging, borrowing, or stealing, one tries to satisfy his senses. Thus, no one in this material world is living peacefully. Yeah, we should be satisfied with whatever Krishna gives us by his mercy and not try and go beyond that threshold of simple living, high thinking. That should be our motto. Simple living, high thinking. Not complicated living and always gross thinking. We should be satisfied with whatever Krishna gives us easily and be satisfied and spend more time in developing Krishna consciousness than developing huge amounts of money that when we die, all that money goes away. There was a family member that we had and who worked very hard every day. But he had a son who was very, what you would say, vicious. He was lazy. He would get drunk. He would have sex. He would always be trying to borrow money from the family members. And because they were families, they would give money to him, unfortunately. And that was a big mistake, of course. So it didn't help him very much by getting that money because he would squander it right away on prostitutes and getting drunk and so forth. So he was a real liability in our family, in our family uh, of relatives. So eventually, the family members refused to give him any money. And then he began to steal money from the family members. And eventually they threw him out of the house and they exonerated him from any relationship with the family, the big extended family. And he ended up being a person living on the street and a real embarrassment to the family. That was very, very sad to see that. But he never stopped begging, borrowing, or stealing. As it says here, if begging is unsuccessful, he borrows. If he cannot pay, he steals. And when he is caught, he is insulted. This is the law of material existence. No one can live here very honestly. Therefore, by trickery, cheating, begging, borrowing, or stealing, one tries to satisfy his senses. Thus, no one in this material world is living peacefully. Okay, that is our takeaway for today. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. We should be satisfied with whatever Krishna gives us and not want to beg, borrow, or steal to have more. And those are uh, behaviors that are what you would call abominable. It's better to be satisfied with whatever Krishna gives us easily and spend our time in being Krishna conscious and not worrying about the future. Krishna will always give us our minimum needs if we are honest. And he'll protect us so that we can live within the, let's say, uh, narrow minimum needs and not be what you would call always hankering for more. I want more. I want more. I want more. I had a friend of mine who was a devotee, and he was always investing on the stock market. So after some time, he built up a stock, uh, let's say, uh, he owned about $2 million, but he was always trying to get more money. And when he had that $2 million, I remember I was talking to him one day. I said, "Prabhu, don't you think you have enough money now to live the rest of your life? $2 million is a lot of money." He said, "It's not enough." So what happened to him? He lost the $2 million. The stock market tanked, and he lost his money, right? And I told him, I said, "Look, I talked to you before. I said, you should have given up when I talked to you. You had $2 million. You could have lived the rest of your life on that money." No, he said, "No, it's not enough." And what happened? He lost everything. Okay, all glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Yeah, I remember there were members of our family, and at least I remember one person, he would always borrow money and never pay it back. And he would spend his money on women and liquor. And nobody in the larger family wanted to see him anymore. You know? He would come always with a sob story about, "Oh, I don't have any money, blah blah blah. Let me borrow. I want to borrow so much money." Yeah, so it worked for a little while, but after a little while, nobody in the family wanted to give him any money. They told him, "Go away. We don't want to see you anymore." That's what happens when we become victims of lust, anger, and greed. That's the next book I'm going to write. Lust, anger, and greed. Okay, thank you very much, my dear devotees. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.